All right, so recently I talked about globalization. So I'm going to give you a couple more hints down and some quick notes. So when we're looking at this, the first thing we want to talk about is that globalization has some positives. We're internationally connected. We get resources from other countries. They get resources from us. A downside is that sometimes countries lose business and they're sent elsewhere. So when corporations become multinational, that means that they are independent or interdependent on other areas. And so multinational corporations are large companies that operate in multiple countries. So McDonald's, Apple, Microsoft, American Eagle, um, Aeropostale, like clothes are designed in America, but they'll be made in China. McDonald's is present in most continents in the world. And so the benefits to companies is that they can outsource, which means that instead of having work done elsewhere, like you could have work, instead of hiring an American to do the work, they send the work to another country where the labor laws are not the same, and it cuts the cost and it increases the production. Um, and when we talk about outsourcing, there's two sides. There's advocates. Advocates are people who like, and critics are people who do not like. So advocates are going to say it creates jobs and wealth in developing countries like America, but then critics say it fails to improve the standard of living. If you have somebody in Cambodia that's only making like 12 cents an hour at a factory and they're making clothes for other countries to wear, that's great that the people in the other countries get the clothes, but if they have a poor or they're in poverty, their standard of living is not better. Also, outsourcing causes a loss of jobs in the home country. So in America, we're not big on clothing industry and production of clothes because we don't want to pay Americans minimum wage when we can pay somebody in another um, Eastern country and not pay them as much money. So there are a couple of trade agreements and organizations. You have GATT, which is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the World Trade Organization, the G8, OPEC, and the European Union. And all of these guys, they have their goals and how their memberships roll and when they were established. But pretty much what they do is they try to work and deal with trade internationally. So we're talking about the Middle East really quick. So over the last probably 15 years, you've probably heard a lot about the Middle East and oil reserves, the growth of Islam, the conflicts between Israel and some of its neighbors. And so what we're going to talk about is that oil in the Middle East. About 2/3 of our oil in the world comes from the Middle East, and the reserves are located in Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, and other Middle Eastern countries. And most members, or most of these countries, are part of OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. And so they, kind of tell us what trade prices are going to be like for oil. They regulate production of oil, exports, and exports. Remember, exports are what are being sent out. Imports are what are being received. And so pretty much oil has allowed the Middle East to become modern. They have industrialization. They have economic and social development, and they were very modern until they had a presence of terrorism that has risen in Islam due to Islamic extremists. So when we talk about the importance of oil, oil is a source of conflict in the Middle East and around the world because people need it to use for their militaries, cars, all types of things. And so it's caused a lot of people to clash and fight over it. When we talk about 1973, we had an oil crisis. That year, Egypt and Syria kind of wanted to gang up on Israel, and so we had an issue with the oil. Israel wanted to react and kind of fight back with these countries, and so it caused us an issue because we are in alliance with Israel. So we resupplied Israel, and OPEC was upset that the United States had supported Israel, and so they announced an oil embargo, which means they limited our oil. And so what ended up happening is that we had high prices in the 1970s on oil. We had to ration, which means some people could fill up on Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Others would fill up Tuesday, Thursday. So when we talk about Islam, Islam is a predominant religion in the Middle East. And people who practice Islam, if they are loyal to Islam, they want the country to still follow most of the Islamic laws and rules. But see, the thing is about oil production and industrialization is that Middle Eastern countries had strived to modernize and move away from the religious aspects, very similar to how Europe moved away from the religious aspects of the Middle Ages and moved into the Renaissance and had more of a secular aspect, and that's kind of what was trying to happen in the Middle East. But then what ends up happening is that Islam is a peaceful religion, but then you have extremist groups. So if you look right here, it talks about extremist groups that have used violence to bring about change, to take away education from women, to force people to not be allowed to read secular text or only just be loyal to the religion and not allow government in other areas to flourish while people still maintain their religion. So that's one thing we've already talked about. When we talk about Islamic terrorist groups, they are extreme and they are radical and they're not truly practicing the faith of Islam. So when we talk about threats to security, there are a couple of things that we need to discuss quickly. Threats to security can be, we've had terrorist attacks like September 11th. We've had bombings on subways around the world. And recently we've had ISIS, who's been a very predominant group right now that are causing terrorist attacks. And so what they do is they threaten global security. They scare people into believing their ideology, and the root word of ideology is idea. So there are two types of categories of weapons that we're going to talk about. We're talking about dangerous weapons, but I like to call them physical weapons because they can be weapons of mass destruction. That means they can be biological, chemical, or nuclear. And they can cause destruction. So you think of like atomic bombs, hydrogen bombs. You think of biological weapons like sicknesses or diseases, and then chemical weapons like chemicals or things like acids and things like that can be used against people to harm them, to cause fear, and cause terrorist groups seek them out to use them for their purposes, as well as governments to establish power and dominance. So biological weapons are made with organisms, toxins found in nature. They're easy, inexpensive to develop, like diseases like anthrax, the plague, smallpox. Now, a lot of these, like smallpox, we have like vaccines for that. But in the 1970s, 70 nations signed treaty prohibiting the production or possession of biological weapons because we understand how dangerous they are. And then officials, occasionally in other countries and even in the United States, we worry about biological weapons. I'm going to skip this slide because we've learned about this before. I'm going to skip this too. I'm going to skip this. But when we talk about global challenges, although globalization is like making people's lives better, one problem is that we have a couple of things. No, I'll be right there. Give me 1 second. I just got to stop the video.